guys, it's Sam and this is my February wrap up. So I have had a great start to my reading year. I just want to point that out because I read 8 books in February, and February was also Tome Topple. So 2 of those books were over 800 pages. So like in total I read like 4,000 something pages in February. I am 7 books ahead on my Goodreads goal. We are thriving in 2020. So the first book that I read in February was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the 3rd and final book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. I have already done a spoiler-free as well as a spoilery discussion on this book, so I will link the spoiler-free video on the screen if you are interested. I basically found this book a little bit rushed and disappointing. I am not a huge fan of this series in a way that a lot of people are, so I wasn't like devastated by the disappointment of this book. I kind of thought that might happen, but there was a lot of things that were rushed about this book. There were a lot of character personalities that I felt changed too suddenly, and I really feel like this series could have benefited from being 4 books and having a little bit more of a transition there and some more plot payoff than it did. I ended up giving this one 3 to 3.5 stars. I then picked up The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson for Tome Topple. This is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series, which is going to be a 10-book epic fantasy series that takes place within his larger Cosmere universe. I'm going to be doing a spoiler-free and a spoilery discussion on this book coming up on Monday, so I don't want to go into this too much because there's a lot that you can get into with this book. I thought this was a great start to a series and lays a lot of the groundwork and foundation for what is obviously going to be an epic series. I really enjoyed all of the characters, really. Like, I didn't dislike any of them. This has a lot of like lawful good type characters and not the morally gray characters that we're so used to seeing with how grimdark is really popular as a genre right now in fantasy. So if you're kind of tired by everyone being morally gray, then this is definitely a series for you, because while there are some morally gray characters in here, I would say, at least in this book, the main characters are just so good and pure. As per usual, I really like how Brandon Sanderson talks about religion and how it affects societies, because there are some interesting religious things happening in here. His really interesting magic systems, obviously, and his really great endings. I did find the first half of this book to be a lot more slow and a little bit repetitive, while the second half was really establishing all the things that I wanted to see and really did kind of kick off the series for me. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I do plan on reading the rest of the series, obviously. I would like to catch up before book 4 comes out, which is coming out in November of this year. I do not know if that is going to happen though. The second book I read for Tome Topple was Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I've already done a full review for this, so I'll link that on the screen. This is the 3rd book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy of a series of series within the realm of the Elderlings universe. So both books I read for Tome Topple are part of larger universes and epic scales and all of that. I did read this on audiobook, and I'm glad that I did, because I always kind of knew going into this series that this book was hard for a lot of people and is a bit of a slog. So I really liked the first third of this book. Then things started to get kind of repetitive with this book, and then it just kind of like dragged a bit for me, because there were some things that we were learning about different magic in particular that was just like very repetitive and kind of vague, and it's all gonna matter more, I know, in the rest of the series, and it's things we need to learn, and there's probably things that happen that are gonna affect like later books in this grand series, but it didn't make the enjoyment of this better. I did find the very end to this to be just a little bit lacking, because I felt like there were some things that I wanted to have more payoff from, because we were building up with them throughout this whole book and throughout all of the series. But I still do deeply value my time I've spent with Fitz, who is the main character that you follow within this series. He is a character that pops up in later series within this world. You kind of follow him throughout his whole life. He's a big mover and shaker in this world, so I was very glad to have followed him throughout his young life here and kind of see the person that he's become and kind of just his identity now and all of these things. So I deeply love and adore him, but some of the plot elements were just not as satisfying as I had hoped they would be. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. This was our House Salt Club book pick, so that is a book club that I do with some friends. We did do a live show here on my channel, which does have spoilers, so I'll link that on the screen, but this is a adult contemporary romance, and it follows our main character of Naledi, who is a grad student, and she keeps getting emails from a prince saying that they are supposed to be married and to send her social security number. Little does she know that this prince is actually going to show up in her life, although she's not going to know who he is right away, because it's a little bit of like mistaken identity, secret identity stuff going on, and everything kind of goes from there. So I listened to this book on audio as well, and I liked the audiobook narration because there are some accents in here that I thought were done really well and kind of immersed you in the story. The kingdom that this prince is from feels very like Black Panther, and that was really fun to experience on audio as well. I really liked our main character of Naledi. I didn't so much like our love interest of the Biso, because because there was some mistaken identity stuff, I just don't tend to like that trope anyway, and the way that I feel like this was done, I couldn't quite forgive a lot of the stuff about it. And also for me, this book had just a lot of sexual content. Not that there was a ton of sex scenes. There were a number of sex scenes which I didn't love a lot. I didn't think that they were well written for me, but also, I just don't tend to love when characters think of each other all the time sexually. Like, I get that that's urges that people have, and that's how attraction works for a lot of people. For me personally, I don't feel sexual attraction in that way. So when people are like, oh my gosh, I just keep thinking about them in this sexual way and doing this and doing that and whatever, I'm just like, please stop. It's making me personally uncomfortable. So while that might not be a problem for you, because maybe that's how you feel attraction and you can like relate to that, for me, I'm just like, stop thinking about the love interest in a sexual way literally all the time. Again, it's only because it was all the time. Like, I'm actually fine when it's occasionally here and there. Like, that makes sense to me. Yes, sure, fine. But when it's like every time they thought of each other, they'd be thinking of each other sexually, I'm just like, okay. I also found some plot elements about this to be kind of weak. I feel like sometimes romance books want to throw like an extra mystery plot in there, and sometimes I'm just like, you don't need to though. Like, that's not why I'm reading it, and if you're not gonna do it well, like, please just leave it out. So I didn't love that, but I ended up giving this 2.5 out of 5 stars because I didn't really love it or hate it. Again, you can listen to my thoughts in more detail on the live show along with everybody else, and I do think I might continue with this series. This is like a companion series. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of different characters in this book that will then have their own books, so I kind of feel like I might read the second book that's following the main character's best friend, and she meets like a Scottish royal, and I can be down with that, but it's not necessarily going to be like my favorite series of all time or anything. I then read another contemporary romance, and that is Heart and Soul by Erin Kinsella. This is one that the author actually contacted me about, and I very rarely accept books for review in that way when the author contacts, but she did her research actually, had watched videos of mine and said like, hey, you said you like these tropes, my book has like 8 of these, and I'm like, cool, I'll try it. So this is a book that I did read on Kindle, and it is a longer book. I think it's like 400 something pages. Anyway, this takes place in Korea. It is dual perspective. Our female character is biracial, Brazilian and Korean, and she is writing a Korean historical drama, and her book is being turned into a K-drama, and she's also there visiting her best friend, and she's on set for this. And our male character is a K-pop idol, and he is actually starring in this K-drama, and our female character has actually loved the group that he's in, and he has been her bias, which I'm not really familiar with a lot of K-pop terms, so I'm sorry, but he has been like her bias, and so she really is like excited to be around him, and things kind of unravel in which they have to start fake dating. And everything kind of goes from there. So I was skeptical at first going into this because I wasn't sure how the power dynamic between the main character being a fan and the other main character being an idol was going to go, but it was actually done really well. And those kinds of lines dissolved over time in a way that was really believable. And the main character like didn't really, like the female character didn't do anything super creepy. He wasn't taking advantage of his power dynamics, and they really grow to become equals there. And there were just so many tropes here. I'm not going to do like a full review of this book right now. If you guys want me to do a full review, let me know, because I'm just not sure if that's something that you guys would watch. But there's so many tropes in here that were really so good. There's fake dating. There's a tall girl, because she's nearly 6 foot, I think she mentions at one point, and he is shorter. I think he's like 5'7", maybe. Like, he's definitely shorter than she is. Like I mentioned, it's a biracial couple because she is biracial herself as well. There is bed sharing for comfort. I believe both characters are pansexual. She's definitely pansexual. He might be bisexual, and then she is demi. So there's great rub there with just the main characters, but then there's a larger friend group, obviously, with the idols and stuff, and with the K-pop group. There was like a very large found friendship element, and then with her best friend. So there's a pretty large friend group, and there's a lot of representation with gender identities and sexualities and stuff within there as well. We don't know a lot of it right now because this is going to be a series, so I think a lot of that will be revealed more, but the author does have a picture with the characters and their like flags and stuff on her Twitter, which I will link. There is a lot of frank sex talk and talk about consent. There's even a scene where a sex scene happens earlier, and then later one of the characters is drunk and the other character's like, we are not going to do anything because you can't give consent right now. So talks of consent in here happen frequently, and it's wonderful. The main female character also has her period at one point, and it's like shown as being like a thing, and look at how problematic this could potentially be in different settings, and like look at how sick it makes her feel. And I just never really see period scenes in romance books. And there's also happy drunk love confessions. So those are just some of the tropes that I really like that were in this. So I thought the romance was great, the found family element was great, and it was just like very cute and pure and wonderful. The thing that docked off some points for me was towards the end there was some plot drama stuff that happened that was kind of, I'm torn on, because it's not a book that relies on the miscommunication trope, but it is a book that relies on like external drama that was so like, oh, I don't love this extra drama piece. I feel like the book would have been just fine without that. Because for me, that took away from the story. It was going to be a 4 stars, basically, and then that happened, and it kind of bumped it down to 3.5 for me. But I really enjoyed this more than I thought I was going to. I am not someone who's really into K-pop, so if you're a K-pop fan, you might like this even more, because I don't have a lot of the knowledge of, like, the K-pop, like, terminology and some of the, like, Korean culture stuff. I looked some stuff up just to make sure, as much as I could tell, that some of the depictions, like, culturally were accurate, and it seemed to be from, like, the research that I was doing, but you might get it a lot more if you're much more into, like, Korean culture and stuff. So I ended up giving this, like I said, 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I do plan on continuing to read the books that come out in this series because I really like this little found family that they have, and it's just sweet. It's so sweet. The next book that I read was The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the third and final book in the Winter Night trilogy, which is an adult fantasy story based on Slavic folklore and mythology, and I have reviews for the first 2 books already, but I will be doing a review for this one, which will come up later this month. This is one of the best, if not the best, finale I have ever read in my life. This had literally everything I wanted. The payoff was so good. It ties into the earlier books. The character arcs are wonderful. The like romance arc is wonderful. The plot stuff is great. The way that the sort of fantastical world and the real world is integrated is wonderful because this is a historical sort of like fantasy setting. So we have like the creatures and like the Slavic folklore and mythology mixed in with things that were happening historically in Russia at that time. And this is where like both things come together. Like this is what the series has been building towards, and it's so wonderful. Like there are so many lines that I wrote down for this book that I will talk about in my discussion of this book, which I never write down lines, but I was so like moved and just empowered, and I just felt so good about this finale. There is loss, there is tragedy, there is joy, there is learning, there's everything that I need and never get in finales. So I don't want anyone to say like, you just don't like finales. False. People just don't do them well. But this one is actually done well. So I will be doing, like I said, a full review and a discussion. But honestly, guys, I'm gonna get on my soapbox because I've been on my soapbox on Twitter ever since I read this. More people need to read this series. Stop sleeping on it. Like, I know it's pretty popular in like certain circles, but like honestly, this deserves all the love that a lot of series like Folk of the Air and ACOTAR and Throne of Glass gets, because I need people to do like gift sets and fan art and everything, because this actually has like a good, compelling plot that's rewarding and well written, and it has all the magic and it has all the aesthetics and it has like the romance stuff and it has everything. So stop sleeping on it. I know some people didn't really like The Bear and the Nightingale as much, but honestly, like, that book is beautiful, and I get that, like, some people think that it's kind of boring. This, just keep reading. The Girl in the Tower is also great, and this last book, like, just read it! Because there are scenes that I know all of you will love, all of you, like, fandom people, so just, you're only hurting yourself by not reading it. That's all I'm saying. It's 5 out of 5 stars. So after that, I kind of wanted to keep with, like, a winter woods theme, because winter is winding down. Thank God. So I wanted to read some of my winter books now because I wouldn't want to read them again until winter, and winter is going to be a ways away in a bit. So I read Winterwood by Shay Earnshaw. This is a YA contemporary fantasy, so it takes place in our world. Our main character is from a line of witches, and they are the only people who can go into the Wickerwood, which is kind of this like evil forest area, and they live in this like mountainous region. At the beginning of the book, there has been a snowstorm so that nobody in the area can leave the area, and there is a boy that has gone missing in the woods, and our main character is able to go into the woods only at a full moon, and she ends up finding this boy, and everything kind of goes from there. So I've also read Shay Earnshaw's other book, which is The Wicked Deep, and I think that she just kind of suffers from the same thing that that book suffered from, that it's a wonderful premise and it's very atmospheric, but it's not much more than that, and I find her books to be kind of like slow and nothing really happens and there's a lot of insta-love. So I really liked the atmosphere here, although I would have preferred more of this magical forest. Like, there's a very big focus on this forest, but you don't really get a lot of the forest. It's more of like an eerie mystery story, and it's very, very, very slow. It's very readable, like you can really fly through it. It's not a very long book, but what's actually happening is like not a lot. And I find that the twists in her books for me are fairly predictable. So like we're building up to this thing and I'm like, I already kind of know what this thing is, but now I'm just reading to kind of see if I'm right, but I know that I'm right. And there's just insta love that I don't particularly love. So I ended up giving this book 2 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read this month was Little Weirds by Jenny Slate. This is a book that I never would have picked up by myself, but Madi from My Name is Madinez, Nicole Sweeney, and I want to say Joss from You'll Get With the Book, but I could be lying. We're all kind of talking about it at the same time, like they had just read it. This is a collection of personal essays by Jenny Slate, who is an actress that I am not personally familiar with. I've never watched anything that she's been in. I'm not familiar with her at all. But they were talking about how like wonderful this was. So I ended up picking it up on audiobook, which is what I recommend doing for this book because the author narrates it and it's wonderful. This is a very short, like I said, essay collection, and it's weird. Like it is very like stream of consciousness, kind of eccentric, just like kind of how Jenny Slate's head is, and it's very odd, but is so like poignant and wonderful. And there were a number of lines in here that were just like a gut punch. If you're interested in the lines that I liked from this, I did document on Goodreads as I was reading things that were just like, oh my god, that I really liked when I was reading it. But in particular for me, I really liked how she talked about like her own identity, but also love and love lost and love wanted, but not to be like taken advantage of. And there's just like a lot. She talks about like misogyny and stuff too. Like it's just really great. And I never would have picked this up if people wouldn't have been recommending it. But it's a hard book to review or describe, and not everyone's gonna like it, and I'm not someone that typically reads like memoirs or essays or anything like that, so I just kind of took a chance on it, and I really ended up enjoying it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books that I did read in February. So comment below, let me know your favorite book that you read in February, or if you have any thoughts about the books that I read in February, let me know. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.